Who doesn't like a good ghost story? I remember AJ doesn't like a good ghost story. Well said, man. But I remember being out in the woods as a kid, and a friend's dad would tell a story about that escaped convict, and it came across the radio, and then somebody was in the car, and then they heard these sounds, and just this building up of this scary story, the spooky story that would spook us as we sat around the fire. I'm not a huge fan of the horror genre or horror movies, but there's something that I've always enjoyed about a good spooky story. One of my formative shows in my childhood was Are You Afraid of the Dark? This was a Nickelodeon show, and the Midnight Society, this was really cool. Like the Midnight Society got around a campfire to share spooky stories with each other, and the intro of the show would set this incredibly spooky mood as these young teens gathered in the woods to share scary stories. Then as an adult, I love Stephen King, and I started enjoying Stephen King through audiobooks. And the reason I started enjoying Stephen King and audiobooks is because the books are stinking long. And so I thought it'd be a good value. If I was going to buy an audiobook, it might as well last 20 or 25 hours because I'm paying for it. And so the cost per hour is quite a bit less as opposed to a book that's only like 6 hours long on audiobook. So that's why I started listening to Stephen King audiobooks. But since then, I've become a really big fan, not because of the horror stuff, but I just love Stephen King. And the recipe for horror and for spooky stories, it builds on things like shadows and suspense. And they are perfect for this time of year. This morning even is a rainy morning here in town, and it's kind of a spooky morning as the wind blows and it's a little bit wet outside. But this time of year is the perfect time for spooky stories as the air is crisp, campfires start to burn, and we get closer to Halloween, and it seems right for a few spooky stories to tell. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to look at some spooky stories. The Bible is full of stories. In fact, the Bible is probably more of a library than it is a book, because it's made up of different books and of different genres and of different ideas and literature. And some of the stories that we find in the Bible are a little on the spooky side. And for the next 3 weeks, we're going to sit around together, to sit around the campfire and share some spooky stories, even share some ghost stories. So as we explore these spooky stories together, my hope is that we will also consider how God might use them to make a difference in your life. And the first spooky story that we're going to look at has all the good marks of a scary story, all the good marks of a spooky story. You see, it takes place at night, like dark. It takes place at night, and there are shadows, there's disguise, there's ghosts, there's fright. It comes from the book of 1 Samuel in the Old Testament. So if you want to follow along, I'm going to be in a little bit reading from 1 Samuel chapter 28. But before I turn there, I want to set the scene for you just a little bit. You see, what we have is this guy named Saul. And Saul is the first king of Israel. And what happened is that the people begged for a king. They wanted to be like the other nations, and so they begged their leaders, give us a king. They begged God, give us a king. And God was like, you don't need a king, I'm your king. But eventually God listened to the people and gave them the king. And if you read about how that happened, God said in the midst of it, if you want a king, you're going to be sorry that you have a king, by the way. But I'll give you a king because I'm going to listen to you. And so what happened is that God chose Saul for the role of the first king of Israel. And as king, Saul worked alongside the largest national leader at the time, a guy by the name of Samuel. And Samuel was a prophet. And most of the role of Saul at this time was leading armies into battle so that they could conquer the land, so that they could have peace in their land and have enough space. But things soured a bit between God and Saul, and especially between Saul and Samuel, because Saul disobeyed God. And what happened is that Samuel then rebuked Saul, and God started looking for someone else to be king. And so what happened is that God chose David, who was a young shepherd at the time. God chose David to be Saul's successor as king, to be the next king. And Samuel at that point anointed David, who was a young shepherd, like I said, as Saul's successor. But if you know anything about kings, kings don't really like it when there are other rivals to the throne. And so there's this long history of kings going after, hunting down, and killing the rival claims to the throne. And that's what Saul tries to do. He hunts down David. He searches out David and tries to put an end to David. And when Saul found that his reign and his life was slipping away, he grew fearful and unstable as the years went on. Well, in time, the prophet Samuel dies. And at this point, Saul is like, I've got to do something about this. And he tries to reassert his faithfulness to God. He tries to put a show on, to try to pretend or maybe honestly to be faithful again, to pull it all back together. And he's thinking, maybe if I get it all back together, God will bless me again. But soon he's going to lose his bearings in life. And now, as we are approaching this spooky story today, if you want to follow along, I'm going to be picking up the story in 1 Samuel chapter 28, beginning in verse 3. And here we read this. Now Samuel had died, and all Israel mourned him and buried him in Ramah, his hometown. And Saul had banned all mediums and diviners from the land. So after Samuel's death, Saul tries to pull it all together and assert his faithfulness. So what does he do? He bans the practice of magic. Now, you may be thinking like magic, okay, whatever. That's like magic today, or they're illusionists, they're grand shows that you might buy a ticket to go see. But this, in the ancient time, this was an incredibly powerful thing. It was incredibly popular at the time because it was a way that people thought that they could find advice, thought that they could find comfort, and tried to make sense of their world through the practice of magic. But this type of magic was always something that God opposed. God always opposed the type of magic that other nations, other people might engage with. And God, it was opposed to the worship of God, and so God opposed it. And so what Saul does is he makes a claim that he's going to put a stop to it. So what does he do? He bans it. He bans diviners. He bans mediums. He bans trying to raise ghosts from the dead. He bans this practice of magic in the land. And despite trying to be faithful, things are about to get really tough for Saul. We pick up the story in verse 4. The Philistines have gathered their forces and advanced to camp at Shunem. Saul gathered all Israel, and they camped at Gilboa. And when Saul saw the Philistine army, he was afraid, and his heart beat wildly. When Saul questioned the Lord didn't answer him, not by dreams, not by the Urim, not by the prophets. And things get tough. Because what's happening is that Saul is gathered there with his army, and he sees that the Philistine army is gathering as well. And the Philistines are a terrible force to deal with at the time. The Philistine army was the main opposition of the people of Israel at the time, and they were feared. They were, like we read that Saul's heart is beating wildly out of his chest. He is scared. The Philistines are an incredibly powerful regional power. They have an advanced military, and some reports say they have giants, okay? So this is a scary bunch of people that is facing down Saul and his army. And Saul has his army, but he's not too confident in his army. He's scared, and he can't hear from God. God's grown silent to him. His heart is beating out of the chest. He doesn't know what to do. He tries to ask for help, but remember, God has already chosen Saul's successor to the throne, and Saul is kind of on his own, facing an unimaginable enemy. Remember that Saul had banned the practice of magic. Saul had banned mediums and diviners. But in his fear, Saul does perhaps what's the unthinkable. Verse 7, we read, "So Saul said to his servants, 'Find me a woman who communicates with ghosts, and then I'll go to her and ask by using her techniques.' There is such a medium in Endor," his servants replied. So the king who banned mediums, the king who banned diviners, the king who banned talking to ghosts, raising the dead, this is the king who is now trying to find a medium, now trying to talk to a diviner. And so what they do is they realize that this king who has banned mediums and is looking for one, his servants know where one exists. His servants know that there is one behind enemy lines in Endor. So Saul is desperate. He is desperate. And this is where the story starts to get good. I mean, it really gets good. So verse 8 we read, Saul disguised himself wearing different clothes. So this is the king, right? But he's disguising himself, wearing different clothes, and then he and two men set out, going to the woman at nighttime. And when they get here, he says, "Please call up the ghost for me. Bring me the one I specify." The king puts on a disguise in the dark of night. He sneaks across enemy territory because Endor is across the enemy lines. And so they have to infiltrate behind the enemy lines. And had he been found at this time by Philistine scouts, he would have been executed. This whole effort would have been gone. The whole thing would have been over. Saul would have been killed. His army would have been captured. But as darkness has covered the land and the spooky music starts to play, the fog starts to rise, Saul finds this woman, a medium, a necromancer, someone who can raise the dead, and he commands her to call up a ghost. Now this woman, she's a medium. She's someone who deals with dead spirits, but she's no fool. And in verse 9, she says, listen. You know what Saul has done? How he has banned all mediums and diviners in the land? What are you doing trying to get me killed? She knows that if she gets caught raising the dead, if she gets caught trying to talk to a spirit from beyond, that she could be killed because it's in direct violation of the king's order. But Saul promised her by the Lord, "As surely as the Lord lives, you won't get into trouble for this." The irony here, Saul pledges to God that she won't get into trouble. God who doesn't want people calling up the dead. God who has forbidden the practice of magic. Saul who has outlawed it. But Saul does what desperate people do, and he claims that God is on his side. And Saul has co-opted God for this illicit night mission. In verse 11 we read, "So the woman said, 'Who do you want me to bring up for you?' 'Bring up Samuel,' Saul said. When the woman saw Samuel, she screamed at Saul, 'Why have you tricked me? You are Saul!' She thinks perhaps now it was a trap, that she's going to be killed. She realizes the king is in front of her. She wonders, she's scared, is it a trick? But Saul is more interested in this spirit coming up from the grave, the chill of death, the flicker in the shadows, the sounds of the grave at midnight. 'Don't be afraid,' the king said to her. 'What do you see?' The woman said to Saul, I see a God coming up from the ground.' 'What does he look like?' Saul said. 'An old man is coming up. He's wrapped in a robe.' And then Saul knew that it was Samuel. And he bowed low out of respect, nose to the ground. And then the next voice we hear is the voice of Samuel possessing the necromancer, possessing the medium. And he starts speaking using her mouth. 'Why have you disturbed me, bringing me up?' Samuel asked Saul. Saul and Samuel didn't part on good terms. And now Saul has ticked off Samuel's ghost. Why are you waking me up in the midst of my sleep? And then Saul unloads on Samuel's ghost. I'm in deep trouble. The Philistines are at war with me. God has turned away from me and no longer answers by prophets or by dreams. So I have called on you to tell me what I should do. Just help me. But Samuel's ghost isn't interested in sympathy. Why do you ask me? Samuel said. Since the Lord has turned away from you and has become your enemy, the Lord has done to you exactly what he spoke through me. The Lord has ripped the kingdom out of your hands and has given it to your friend David. The Lord has done this very thing to you today because you didn't listen to the Lord. You didn't listen to the Lord's voice. You didn't carry out his fierce anger against the Amalekites. The Lord will now hand you over, both you and Israel, to the Philistines. Come tomorrow, you and your sons will be with me. The Lord will hand Israel's army over to the Philistines. And immediately Saul fell, full length on the ground, utterly terrified at what Samuel had said. Because Saul knows where Samuel is. He's in the grave. And Samuel tells him, by tomorrow, you and your sons are going to be with me. You can almost hear the ghostly laugh as Samuel descends back into the midst of the grave. In the dark night, Saul is undone. Instead of trusting in God, Saul has abandoned God. Instead of prayer, Saul seeks to take his fear into his own hands, and he is undone. And it ends tragically for Saul. It ends with the pronouncement of his death. And when the Philistines attack, the Israelites flee. His sons are killed, and Saul ends up taking his own life. It's a chilling story. But here's the thing. Saul isn't too far away from us. Saul isn't that far away from you, perhaps. We all face our own fears. We all have our own witching hours, and maybe you aren't trying to call up dead spirits like Saul, but there are moments in life when fear grips us so tightly that you can barely breathe, and when the anxiety beats in the chest like Saul's heart in the camp, in these moments it's tempting to do exactly what Saul did, to reach for anything that promises comfort, control, or escape. And sometimes it's little escapes, like binge watching shows, scrolling social media, watching cable news nonstop in the background, maybe an extra glass of wine at night. But sometimes it's bigger, turning to substances more often. That extra glass of wine turns into several extra glasses of wine or bottles. Talking with people who aren't your spouse that grows into an affair. The scrolling that turns into deep dives on conspiracy theories that end up overtaking much of who you are. Sometimes it's trying to control what you really can't control. Believing that you can handle it on your own if you just push harder, if you just work harder. You can control things just a little bit more if you just do more, work harder, worry more. And just like Saul, those paths only lead to more fear and more emptiness. Paul's successor, though, David, he faced fear differently. I've shared how when Saul left God, God picked a successor. God picked David, a young shepherd boy. And even though God picked David, things were not easy for David. In fact, David had to be on the run for much of his life at the time because Saul was hunting down David, hoping to put an end to his threat to the throne. And on top of this, David also faced down the Philistine armies in battle. He knew fear. But as David knew fear, he did not seek answers in himself, and he did not seek answers in ghosts Instead, in David's fear, he prayed. Tradition tells us that most of the Psalms in the Bible are written by David. And in Psalm 56, he shares about one of those times that he was afraid. The beginning of Psalm 56 says this, God, have mercy on me, because I'm being trampled all day long. My enemy oppresses me. My attackers trample me all day long because I have so many enemies. Now, this is something that anybody that's afraid could say. This is something that Saul could have said. Saul could have said this exact same thing, but David responded to this threat differently than Saul did. He continues in the psalm in the next verse, Exalted One, whenever I'm afraid, I put my trust in you. And God, whose word I praise, I trust in God. I won't be afraid. What can mere flesh do to me? You know, Saul let fear destroy him. Saul let fear of the future, fear of the unknown, destroy him. But David let fear drive him back to God. And in the face of fear, David trusts God. The reality is that fear will come, and it comes for us all. It'll come for you, but fear doesn't have to control you. In the face of fear, you don't have to be immobilized. In the face of fear, you don't have to let the unknown destroy you. In the face of fear, do as David did, trust God. In the face of fear, do as David did, trust God. What fear are you carrying today? What fear are you carrying today? Maybe it's a fear about work. Maybe it's a fear about, the nation. Maybe it's a fear about your community. Maybe it's a fear about your family. Maybe it's a fear about yourself. Maybe it's a fear about your child. What fear are you carrying today? What fear creeps in at night and wakes you up in the middle of the night? Can't go back to sleep because your heart's racing. You start sweating. What fear creeps in your mind at night? Don't let it undo you like Saul, but instead bring it to God. In the face of fear, trust God. In the face of fear, bring it to God in prayer. In the face of fear, do as David did. Put your trust in the Lord. Trust in God. Because when God is there, as David said, what can mere flesh do? Trust in the Lord. Let me pray for you. God, the world can be a scary place. This time of year we tell a lot of scary stories and perhaps think about scary costumes and as shadows fall. But we also know that there's nothing more scary than what happens in real life. There's nothing more scary than the things that wake us up at night. There's nothing more scary than an undiagnosed health concern. There's nothing more scary than what can really happen. So God, my prayer this day is for each one who hears that when faced with fear, that they will turn not to themselves, not to substances, not to trying to fix it on their own, but instead that they will turn to you. That each one, that me, myself, that we would all turn to you and put our trust in you, because in you we can have life. God, anyone who's struggling with this today, I pray that their hearts are open to you. I pray that they open their heart to you and just put their trust in you. God, I give this to you. Give this to you in the name of Jesus, I pray. Amen.